Part 2, Sections 15 to 17 of Flatland. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Ruth Golding. Flatland, A Romance of Many Dimensions by Edwin Abbott Abbott. Part 2, Section 15, Concerning a Stranger from Spaceland. From dreams I proceed to facts. It was the last day of the 1999th year of our era. The pattering of the rain had long ago announced nightfall, and I was sitting in the company of my wife, musing on the events of the past and the prospects of the coming year, the coming century, the coming millennium. Footnote: when I say sitting, of course I do not mean any change of attitude such as you in Spaceland signify by that word, for as we have no feet, we can no more sit nor stand, in your sense of the word, than one of your soles or flounders. Nevertheless, we perfectly well recognise the different mental states of volition implied in lying, sitting, and standing, which are to some extent indicated to a beholder by a slight increase of lustre corresponding to the increase of volition. But on this and a thousand other kindred subjects time forbids me to dwell. End of footnote. My 4 sons and 2 orphan grandchildren had retired to their several apartments, and my wife alone remained with me to see the old millennium out and the new one in. I was wrapped in thought, pondering in my mind some words that had casually issued from the mouth of my youngest grandson, a most promising young hexagon of unusual brilliancy and perfect angularity. His uncles and I had been giving him his usual practical lesson in sight recognition, turning ourselves upon our centres, now rapidly, now more slowly, and questioning him as to our positions; and his answers had been so satisfactory that I had been induced to reward him by giving him a few hints on arithmetic as applied to geometry. Taking 9 squares, each an inch every way, I had put them together so as to make one large square with a side of 3 inches; and I had hence proved to my little grandson that, though it was impossible for us to see the inside of the square, yet we might ascertain the number of square inches in a square by simply squaring the number of inches in the side. And thus, said I, we know that 3 squared, or 9, represents the number of square inches in a square whose side is 3 inches long. The little hexagon meditated on this a while, and then said to me, "But you have been teaching me to raise numbers to the 3rd power. I suppose 3 cubed must mean something in geometry. What does it mean?" "Nothing at all," replied I, "not at least in geometry, for geometry has only 2 dimensions." And then I began to show the boy how a point, by moving through a length of 3 inches, makes a line of 3 inches, which may be represented by 3, and how a line of 3 inches, moving parallel to itself through a length of 3 inches, makes a square of 3 inches every way, which may be represented by 3 squared. Upon this, my grandson, again returning to his former suggestion, took me up rather suddenly and exclaimed, "Well then, if a point by moving 3 inches makes a line of 3 inches represented by 3, and if a straight line of 3 inches moving parallel to itself makes a square of 3 inches every way represented by 3 squared, it must be that a square of 3 inches every way, moving somehow parallel to itself, but I don't see how, must make a something else, but I don't see what, of 3 inches every way, and this must be represented by 3 cubed." "Go to bed," said I, a little ruffled by his interruption. "If you would talk less nonsense, you would remember more sense." So my grandson had disappeared in disgrace, and there I sat by my wife's side, endeavouring to form a retrospect of the year 1999, and of the possibilities of the year 2000, but not quite able to shake off the thoughts suggested by the prattle of my bright little hexagon. Only a few sands now remained in the half-hour glass. Rousing myself from my reverie, I turned the glass northward for the last time in the old millennium, and in the act I exclaimed aloud, "The boy is a fool!" Straightway I became conscious of a presence in the room, and a chilling breath thrilled through my very being. "He is no such thing!" cried my wife, "and you are breaking the commandments in thus dishonouring your own grandson." But I took no notice of her. Looking round in every direction, I could see nothing, yet still I felt a presence, and shivered as the cold whisper came again. I started up. "What is the matter?" said my wife. "There is no draught. What are you looking for? There is nothing." There was nothing, and I resumed my seat, again exclaiming, "The boy is a fool, I say. 3 cubed can have no meaning in geometry." At once there came a distinctly audible reply. "The boy is not a fool, and 3 cubed has an obvious geometrical meaning." My wife, as well as myself, heard the words, although she did not understand their meaning, and both of us sprang forward in the direction of the sound. What was our horror when we saw before us a figure! At the first glance it appeared to be a woman seen sideways, but a moment's observation showed me that the extremities passed into dimness too rapidly to represent one of the female sex, and I should have thought it a circle, only that it seemed to change its size in a manner impossible for a circle, or for any irregular figure of which I had had experience. But my wife had not my experience, nor the coolness necessary to note these characteristics. With the usual hastiness and unreasoning jealousy of her sex, she flew at once to the conclusion that a woman had entered the house through some small aperture. "How comes this person here?" she exclaimed. "You promised me, my dear, that there should be no ventilators in our new house." "Nor are there any," said I. "But what makes you think that the stranger is a woman? I see by my power of sight recognition—" "Oh, I have no patience with your sight recognition," replied she. "Feeling is believing, and a straight line to the touch is worth a circle to the sight. 2 proverbs very common with the frailer sex in Flatland." "Well," said I, for I was afraid of irritating her, "if it must be so, demand an introduction." Assuming her most gracious manner, my wife advanced towards the stranger. "Permit me, madam, to feel and to be felt by—" then suddenly recoiling, "Oh, it is not a woman, and there are no angles either, not a trace of one. Can it be that I have so misbehaved to a perfect circle?" "I am indeed, in a sense, a circle," replied the voice, "and a more perfect circle than any in Flatland. But, to speak more accurately, I am many circles in one." Then he added more mildly, "I have a message, dear madam, to your husband, which I must not deliver in your presence; and if you would suffer us to retire for a few minutes—" But my wife would not listen to the proposal that our august visitor should so incommode himself, and assuring the circle that the hour for her own retirement had long passed, with many reiterated apologies for her recent indiscretion, she at last retreated to her apartment. I glanced at the half-hour glass. The last sands had fallen. The second millennium had begun. Section 16. How the stranger vainly endeavoured to reveal to me in words the mysteries of Spaceland. As soon as the sound of my wife's retreating footsteps had died away, I began to approach the stranger, with the intention of taking a nearer view, and of bidding him be seated; but his appearance struck me dumb and motionless with astonishment. Without the slightest symptoms of angularity, he nevertheless varied every instant, with gradations of size and brightness scarcely possible for any figure within the scope of my experience. The thought flashed across me that I might have before me a burglar or cut-throat, some monstrous irregular isosceles, who, by feigning the voice of a circle, had obtained admission somehow into the house, and was now preparing to stab me with his acute angle. In a sitting room, the absence of fog, and the season happened to be remarkably dry, made it difficult for me to trust to sight recognition, especially at the short distance at which I was standing. Desperate with fear, I rushed forward with an unceremonious "You must permit me, sir," and felt him. My wife was right. There was not the trace of an angle, not the slightest roughness or inequality. Never in my life had I met with a more perfect circle. He remained motionless while I walked round him, beginning from his eye and returning to it again. Circular he was throughout, a perfectly satisfactory circle. There could not be a doubt of it. Then followed a dialogue, which I will endeavour to set down as near as I can recollect it, omitting only some of my profuse apologies, for I was covered with shame and humiliation that I, a square, should have been guilty of the impertinence of feeling a circle. It was commenced by the stranger, with some impatience at the lengthiness of my introductory process. Stranger: Have you felt me enough by this time? Are you not introduced to me yet? I: Most illustrious sir, excuse my awkwardness, which arises not from ignorance of the usages of polite society, but from a little surprise and nervousness consequent on this somewhat unexpected visit, and I beseech you to reveal my indiscretion to no one, and especially not to my wife. But before your lordship enters into further communications, would he deign to satisfy the curiosity of one who would gladly know whence his visitor came? Stranger: From space! From space, sir! Whence else? I: Pardon me, my lord, but is not your lordship already in space? Your lordship and his humble servant, even at this moment? Stranger: Pooh! What do you know of space? Define space. I: Space, my lord, is height and breadth indefinitely prolonged. Stranger: Exactly. You see, you do not even know what space is. You think it is of 2 dimensions only, but I have come to announce to you a third: height, breadth, and length. I: Your lordship is pleased to be merry. We also speak of length and height, or breadth and thickness, thus denoting 2 dimensions by 4 names. Stranger: But I mean not only 3 names, but 3 dimensions. I: Would your lordship indicate or explain to me in what direction is the 3rd dimension, unknown to me? Stranger: I came from it. It is up above and down below. I: My lord means seemingly that it is northward and southward. Stranger: I mean nothing of the kind. I mean a direction in which you cannot look, because you have no eye in your side. I: Pardon me, my lord. A moment's inspection will convince your lordship that I have a perfect luminary at the juncture of 2 of my sides. Stranger: Yes, but in order to see into space, you ought to have an eye not on your perimeter, but on your side, that is, on what you would probably call your inside, but we in Spaceland should call it your side. I: An eye in my inside? An eye in my stomach? Your lordship jests. Stranger: I am in no jesting humour. I tell you that I come from space, or, since you will not understand what space means, from the land of 3 dimensions, whence I but lately looked down upon your plane, which you call space, forsooth. From that position of advantage I discerned all that you speak of as solid, by which you mean enclosed on 4 sides, your houses, your churches, your very chests and safes, yes, even your insides and stomachs, all lying open and exposed to my view. I. Such assertions are easily made, my lord. Stranger. But not easily proved, you mean. But I mean to prove mine. When I descended here, I saw your 4 sons, the pentagons, each in his apartment, and your 2 grandsons, the hexagons. I saw your youngest hexagon remain a while with you, and then retire to his room, leaving you and your wife alone. I saw your isosceles servants, 3 in number, in the kitchen at supper, and the little page in the scullery. Then I came here, and how do you think I came? I. Through the roof, I suppose. Stranger. Not so. Your roof, as you know very well, has been recently repaired, and has no aperture by which even a woman could penetrate. I tell you, I come from space. Are you not convinced by what I have told you of your children and household? I. Your lordship must be aware that such facts touching the belongings of his humble servant might be easily ascertained by any one in the neighbourhood possessing your lordship's ample means of obtaining information. Stranger. How shall I convince him? Surely a plain statement of facts, followed by ocular demonstration, ought to suffice. Now, sir, listen to me. You are living on a plain. What you style Flatland is the vast level surface of what I may call a fluid, on or in the top of which you and your countrymen move about, without rising above it or falling below it. I am not a plane figure, but a solid. You call me a circle, but in reality I am not a circle, but an infinite number of circles, of size varying from a point to a circle of 13 inches in diameter, one placed on the top of the other. When I cut through your plane, as I am now doing, I make in your plane a section which you, very rightly, call a circle. For even a sphere, which is my proper name in my own country, if he manifest himself at all to an inhabitant of Flatland, must needs manifest himself as a circle. Do you not remember? For I, who see all things, discerned last night the phantasmal vision of Lineland written upon your brain. Do you not remember, I say, how, when you entered the realm of Lineland, you were compelled to manifest yourself to the king not as a square but as a line, because that linear realm had not dimensions enough to represent the whole of you, but only a slice or section of you? In precisely the same way, your country of 2 dimensions is not spacious enough to represent me, a being of 3, but can only exhibit a slice or section of me, which is what you call a circle. The diminished brightness of your eye indicates incredulity, but now prepare to receive proof positive of the truth of my assertions. You cannot indeed see more than one of my sections or circles at a time, for you have no power to raise your eye out of the plane of Flatland, but you can at least see that as I rise in space, so my section becomes smaller. See now, I will rise, and the effect upon your eye will be that my circle will become smaller and smaller till it dwindles to a point and finally vanishes. Reader's note: the following paragraph makes reference to a diagram. The diagram shows a horizontal line. Cutting the line, there are 3 spheres. The first, or leftmost, is half above and half below the line, with its equator drawn at the level of the line to indicate the sphere's solid nature. Over it is written the sphere with his section at full size. The second or central sphere is positioned about 5/6 above the line and 1/6 below, with a circumference drawn at the level of the line. This is labelled 2, the sphere rising. The third or right-hand sphere is nearly all above the line, with just a sliver below, the circumference being drawn at the level of the line. This is labelled 3, the sphere on the point of vanishing. At the right-hand end of the line there is an eye marked My Eye, looking towards the left. End of reader's note. There was no rising that I could see, but he diminished and finally vanished. I winked once or twice to make sure that I was not dreaming, but it was no dream, for from the depths of nowhere came forth a hollow voice, close to my heart it seemed. "Am I quite gone? Are you convinced now? Well, now I will gradually return to Flatland, and you shall see my section become larger and larger." Every reader in Spaceland will easily understand that my mysterious guest was speaking the language of truth, and even of simplicity. But to me, proficient though I was in Flatland mathematics, it was by no means a simple matter. The rough diagram given above will make it clear to any Spaceland child that the sphere, ascending in the 3 positions indicated there, must needs have manifested himself to me, or to any Flatlander, as a circle, at first of full size, then small, and at last very small indeed, approaching to a point. But to me, although I saw the facts before me, the causes were as dark as ever. All that I could comprehend was, that the circle had made himself smaller and vanished, and that he had now reappeared and was rapidly making himself larger. When he had regained his original size, he heaved a deep sigh, for he perceived by my silence that I had altogether failed to comprehend him. And indeed I was now inclining to the belief that he must be no circle at all, but some extremely clever juggler, or else that the old wives' tales were true, and that after all there were such people as enchanters and magicians. After a long pause he muttered to himself, "One resource alone remains if I am not to resort to action. I must try the method of analogy." Then followed a still longer silence, after which he continued our dialogue. Sphere. Tell me, Mr. Mathematician, if a point moves northward and leaves a luminous wake, what name would you give to the wake? I. A straight line. Sphere. And a straight line has how many extremities? I. 2. Sphere. Now conceive the northward straight line moving parallel to itself, east and west, so that every point in it leaves behind it the wake of a straight line. What name will you give to the figure thereby formed? We will suppose that it moves through a distance equal to the original straight line. What name, I say? I. A square. Sphere. And how many sides has a square, and how many angles? I. 4 sides and 4 angles. Sphere. Now stretch your imagination a little and conceive a square in Flatland moving parallel to itself upward. I. What? Northward? Sphere. No, not northward, upward. Out of Flatland altogether. If it moved northward, the southern points in the square would have to move through the positions previously occupied by the northern points, but that is not my meaning. I mean that every point in you, for you are a square and will serve the purpose of my illustration, every point in you, that is to say in what you call your inside, is to pass upwards through space in such a way that no point shall pass through the position previously occupied by any other point, but each point shall describe a straight line of its own. This is all in accordance with analogy. Surely it must be clear to you." Restraining my impatience, for I was now under a strong temptation to rush blindly at my visitor, and to precipitate him into space, or out of Flatland, anywhere, so that I could get rid of him, I replied, "And what may be the nature of the figure which I am to shape out by this motion, which you are pleased to denote by the word upward? I presume it is describable in the language of Flatland?" Sphere. "Oh, certainly. It is all plain and simple, and in strict accordance with analogy. Only, by the way, you must not speak of the result as being a figure, but as a solid. But I will describe it to you, or rather not I, but analogy. We began with a single point, which, of course, being itself a point, has only one terminal point. One point produces a line with two terminal points. One line produces a square with 4 terminal points. Now you can yourself give the answer to your own question. 1, 2, 4 are evidently in geometrical progression. What is the next number? I. 8. Sphere. Exactly. The one square produces a something which you do not as yet know a name for, but which we call a cube, with 8 terminal points. Now are you convinced? I. And has this creature sides as well as angles, or what you call terminal points? Sphere. Of course, and all according to analogy. But, by the way, not what you call sides, but what we call sides. You would call them solids. I. And how many solids or sides will appertain to this being whom I am to generate by the motion of my inside in an upward direction, and whom you call a cube? Sphere. How can you ask? And you a mathematician? The side of anything is always, if I may so say, one dimension behind the thing. Consequently, as there is no dimension behind a point has 0 sides. A line, if I may so say, has 2 sides, for the points of a line may be called by courtesy its sides. A square has 4 sides, 0, 2, 4. What progression do you call that? I. Arithmetical. Sphere. And what is the next number? I. 6. Sphere. Exactly. Then you see you have answered your own question. The cube which you will generate will be bounded by 6 sides, that is to say, 6 of your insides. You see it all now, eh? Monster! I shrieked. Be thou juggler, enchanter, dream, or devil, no more will I endure thy mockeries. Either thou or I must perish. And saying these words, I precipitated myself upon him. Section 17. How the sphere, having in vain tried words, resorted to deeds. It was in vain. I brought my hardest right angle into violent collision with the stranger, pressing on him with a force sufficient to have destroyed any ordinary circle. But I could feel him slowly and unarrestably slipping from my contact, not edging to the right nor to the left, but moving somehow out of the world and vanishing to nothing. Soon there was a blank, but I still heard the intruder's voice. Sphere. Why will you refuse to listen to reason? I had hoped to find in you, as being a man of sense and an accomplished mathematician, a fit apostle for the gospel of the 3 dimensions, which I am allowed to preach once only in 1,000 years. But now I know not how to convince you. Stay, I have it. deeds and not words shall proclaim the truth. Listen, my friend. I have told you I can see from my position in space the inside of all things that you consider closed. For example, I see in yonder cupboard near which you are standing several of what you call boxes, but like everything else in Flatland they have no tops nor bottoms, full of money. I also see 2 tablets of accounts. I am about to descend into that cupboard and to bring you one of those tablets. I saw you lock the cupboard half an hour ago, and I know you have the key in your possession, but I descend from space. The doors, you see, remain unmoved. Now I am in the cupboard and am taking the tablet. Now I have it. Now I ascend with it. I rushed to the closet and dashed the door open. One of the tablets was gone. With a mocking laugh, the stranger appeared in the other corner of the room, and at the same time the tablet appeared upon the floor. I took it up. There could be no doubt. It was the missing tablet. I groaned with horror, doubting whether I was not out of my senses, but the stranger continued, "Surely you must now see that my explanation and no other suits the phenomena. What you call solid things are really superficial. What you call space is really nothing but a great plain. I am in space, and look down upon the insides of the things of which you only see the outsides. You could leave this plane yourself, if you could but summon up the necessary volition. A slight upward or downward motion would enable you to see all that I can see. The higher I mount, and the further I go from your plane, the more I can see, though of course I see it on a smaller scale. For example, I am ascending. Now I can see your neighbour the hexagon and his family in their several apartments. Now I see the inside of the theatre 10 doors off, from which the audience is only just departing, and on the other side a circle in his study sitting at his books. Now I shall come back to you, and as a crowning proof, what do you say to my giving you a touch, just the least touch, in your stomach? It will not seriously injure you, and the slight pain you may suffer cannot be compared with the mental benefit you will receive." Before I could utter a word of remonstrance, I felt a shooting pain in my inside, and a demoniacal laugh seemed to issue from within me. A moment afterwards, the sharp agony had ceased, leaving nothing but a dull ache behind, and the stranger began to reappear, saying, as he gradually increased in size, "There, I have not hurt you much, have I? If you are not convinced now, I don't know what will convince you. What say you?" My resolution was taken. It seemed intolerable that I should endure existence subject to the arbitrary visitations of a magician who could thus play tricks with one's very stomach. If only I could in any way manage to pin him against the wall till help came. Once more I dashed my hardest angle against him, at the same time alarming the whole household by my cries for aid. I believe, at the moment of my onset, the stranger had sunk below our plane, and really found difficulty in rising. In any case he remained motionless, while I, hearing, as I thought, the sound of some help approaching, pressed against him with redoubled vigour, and continued to shout for assistance. A convulsive shudder ran through the sphere. "This must not be," I thought I heard him say. "Either he must listen to reason, or I must have recourse to the last resource of civilization." Then, addressing me in a louder tone, he hurriedly exclaimed, "Listen! No stranger must witness what you have witnessed. Send your wife back at once, before she enters the apartment. The gospel of 3 dimensions must not be thus frustrated. Not thus must the fruits of 1,000 years of waiting be thrown away. I hear her coming. Back, back, away from me, or you must go with me, whither you know not, into the land of 3 dimensions. Fool! Madman! Irregular! I exclaimed. Never will I release thee. Thou shalt pay the penalty of thine impostures. Ha! Is it come to this? Thundered the stranger. Then meet your fate. Out of your plane you go. Once, twice, thrice. 'Tis done. End of section 17. Recording by Ruth Golding. Sections 18 to 20 of Flatland. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Ruth Golding. Flatland, a romance of many dimensions by Edwin Abbott Abbott. Part 2, Section 18. How I came to Spaceland and what I saw there. An unspeakable horror seized me. There was a darkness, then a dizzy, sickening sensation of sight that was not like seeing. I saw a line that was no line, space that was not space. I was myself and not myself. When I could find voice, I shrieked aloud in agony, "Either this is madness or it is hell." "It is neither," calmly replied the voice of the sphere. "It is knowledge. It is 3 dimensions. Open your eye once again and try to look steadily." I looked, and behold, a new world. There stood before me, visibly incorporate, all that I had before inferred, conjectured, dreamed, of perfect circular beauty. What seemed the centre of the stranger's form lay open to my view. Yet I could see no heart, nor lungs, nor arteries, only a beautiful, harmonious something, for which I had no words. But you, my readers in Spaceland, would call it the surface of the sphere. Prostrating myself mentally before my guide, I cried, "How is it, O divine ideal of consummate loveliness and wisdom, that I see thy inside, and yet cannot discern thy heart, thy lungs, thy arteries, thy liver?" "What you think you see not," he replied. "It is not given to you nor to any other being to behold my internal parts. I am of a different order of beings from those in Flatland. Were I a circle, you could discern my intestines, but I am a being composed, as I told you before, of many circles, the many in the one, called in this country a sphere. And just as the outside of a cube is a square, so the outside of a sphere presents the appearance of a circle." Bewildered though I was by my teacher's enigmatic utterance, I no longer chafed against it, but worshipped him in silent adoration. He continued with more mildness in his voice, "Distress not yourself if you cannot at first understand the deeper mysteries of Spaceland. By degrees they will dawn upon you. Let us begin by casting back a glance at the region whence you came. Return with me a while to the plains of Flatland, and I will show you that which you have so often reasoned and thought about, but never seen with the sense of sight, a visible angle." "Impossible!" I cried. But, the sphere leading the way, I followed as if in a dream, till once more his voice arrested me. "Look yonder, and behold your own pentagonal house and all its inmates." Reader's note: the following paragraph refers to a detailed diagram. The diagram shows the points of the compass with north at the top. Next to this there is a large equal-sided pentagon sitting on a horizontal base. Centrally placed on the lower left edge of the pentagon there is an opening labelled men's door, the size of the opening being about a quarter of the length of that edge. This door leads into a large central space labelled the hall, which is otherwise surrounded by rooms. The position of these rooms will now be described. Clockwise from the northern point, the upper right edge is divided equally between two rooms, labelled in order my study and my bedroom. The left-hand wall of the study runs vertically down from the northern point, and the right-hand wall is parallel to the lower right edge of the pentagon. The study has a door into the hall, and there is an isosceles triangle inside, labelled the page. Sharing a wall with the study is my rhomboid-shaped bedroom, the right-hand wall of which is the top quarter of the lower right-hand edge of the pentagon. It shares a wall and communicating door with the room to the south, labelled my wife's apartment. About 3/10 down the lower right edge, there is a narrow opening labelled women's door. This leads into a long, narrow room labelled my wife's apartment. This room has doorways into my bedroom above, into the hall to the left, and into the room to the south, also long and narrow, where a straight line is marked my daughter. The only door from my daughter's room is into my wife's apartment. Continuing clockwise down the lower right edge of the pentagon, the next room is a long and wide room with two openings into the hall. Inside are three isosceles triangles of varying acuteness. The uppermost and most acute is labelled the scullion, the next and middle-sized is labelled the footman, and the lowest and least acute is labelled the butler. At the bottom right point of the pentagon, a large corner room is labelled the cellar and has a door into the hall. Along the left half of the bottom or southern edge there are two small rooms, each with a door into the hall, and each with a hexagon inside, labelled my grandson's. Continuing clockwise up the left side of the pentagon, between the men's door and the northern point there are four small rooms. Each of these rooms, labelled my son's, has a pentagon inside it and a door into the hall. In the middle of the central hall is a straight line, labelled my wife. Outside the pentagon, one at each end of the bottom or southern edge, are two very acute isosceles triangles, each labelled policeman. End of reader's note. I looked below and saw with my physical eye all that domestic individuality which I had hitherto merely inferred with the understanding. And how poor and shadowy was the inferred conjecture in comparison with the reality which I now beheld. My four sons calmly asleep in the north-western rooms, my two orphan grandsons to the south, the servants, the butler, my daughter, all in their several apartments. Only my affectionate wife, alarmed by my continued absence, had quitted her room, and was roving up and down in the hall, anxiously awaiting my return. Also the page, aroused by my cries, had left his room, and, under pretext of ascertaining whether I had fallen somewhere in a faint, was prying into the cabinet in my study. All this I could now see, not merely infer. And as we came nearer and nearer, I could discern even the contents of my cabinet, and the two chests of gold, and the tablets of which the sphere had made mention. Touched by my wife's distress, I would have sprung downward to reassure her, but I found myself incapable of motion. "Trouble not yourself about your wife," said my guide. "She will not be long left in anxiety. Meantime, let us take a survey of Flatland." Once more I felt myself rising through space. It was even as the sphere had said. The further we receded from the object we beheld, the larger became the field of vision. My native city, with the interior of every house and every creature therein, lay open to my view in miniature. We mounted higher, and lo, the secrets of the earth, the depths of mines and inmost caverns of the hills were bared before me. Awestruck at the sight of the mysteries of the earth thus unveiled before my unworthy eye, I said to my companion, "Behold, I am become as a god! For the wise men in our country say that to see all things, or, as they express it, omnividence, is the attribute of God alone." There was something of scorn in the voice of my teacher as he made answer, "Is it so indeed? Then the very pickpockets and cutthroats of my country are to be worshipped by your wise men as being gods; for there is not one of them that does not see as much as you see now. But trust me, your wise men are wrong." I. Then is omnividence the attribute of others beside gods? Sphere. I do not know. But if a pickpocket or a cutthroat of our country can see everything that is in your country, surely that is no reason why the pickpocket or cutthroat should be accepted by you as a god. This omnividence, as you call it, it is not a common word in Spaceland, does it make you more just, more merciful, less selfish, more loving? Not in the least. Then how does it make you more divine? I. More merciful, more loving? But these are the qualities of women, and we know that a circle is a higher being than a straight line, in so far as knowledge and wisdom are more to be esteemed than mere affection. Sphere. It is not for me to classify human faculties according to merit, yet many of the best and wisest in Spaceland think more of the affections than of the understanding, more of your despised straight lines than of your belauded circles. But enough of this. Look yonder. Do you know that building? I looked, and afar off I saw an immense polygonal structure, in which I recognised the General Assembly Hall of the States of Flatland, surrounded by dense lines of pentagonal buildings at right angles to each other, which I knew to be streets, and I perceived that I was approaching the great metropolis. "Here we descend," said my guide. It was now morning, the first hour of the first day of the 2000th year of our era. Acting, as was their wont, in strict accordance with precedent, the highest circles of the realm were meeting in solemn conclave, as they had met on the first hour of the first day of the year 1000, and also on the first hour of the first day of the year 0. The minutes of the previous meetings were now read by one whom I at once recognised as my brother, a perfectly symmetrical square, and the chief clerk of the High Council. It was found recorded on each occasion that, whereas the States had been troubled by divers ill-intentioned persons pretending to have received revelations from another world, and professing to produce demonstrations whereby they had instigated to frenzy both themselves and others, it had been for this cause unanimously resolved by the Grand Council that on the first day of each millenary special injunctions be sent to the prefects in the several districts of Flatland to make strict search for such misguided persons, and without formality of mathematical examination to destroy all such as were isosceles of any degree, to scourge and imprison any regular triangle, to cause any square or pentagon to be sent to the district asylum, and to arrest any one of higher rank, sending him straightway to the capital to be examined and judged by the council. "You hear your fate," said the sphere to me, while the council was passing for the third time the formal resolution. "Death or imprisonment awaits the apostle of the gospel of three dimensions." "Not so," replied I. "The matter is now so clear to me, the nature of real space so palpable, that methinks I could make a child understand it. Permit me but to descend at this moment and enlighten them." "Not yet," said my guide. "The time will come for that. Meantime I must perform my mission. Stay thou there in thy place." Saying these words, he leapt with great dexterity into the sea, if I may so call it, of Flatland, right in the midst of the ring of counsellors. "I come," cried he, "to proclaim that there is a land of 3 dimensions." I could see many of the younger counsellors start back in manifest horror as the sphere's circular section widened before them. But on a sign from the presiding circle, who showed not the slightest alarm or surprise, 6 isosceles of a low type from 6 different quarters rushed upon the sphere. "We have him!" they cried. "No! Yes! We have him still! He's going! He's gone!" "My lords," said the President to the junior circles of the Council, "there is not the slightest need for surprise. The secret archives, to which I alone have access, tell me that a similar occurrence happened on the last 2 millennial commencements. You will, of course, say nothing of these trifles outside the cabinet." Raising his voice, he now summoned the guard. "Arrest the policemen. Gag them. You know your duty." After he had consigned to their fate the wretched policemen, ill-fated and unwilling witnesses of a state secret which they were not to be permitted to reveal, he again addressed the councillors. "My lords, the business of the council being concluded, I have only to wish you a happy New Year." Before departing, he expressed at some length to the clerk, my excellent but most unfortunate brother, his sincere regret that, in accordance with precedent, and for the sake of secrecy, he must condemn him to perpetual imprisonment, but added his satisfaction that, unless some mention were made by him of that day's incident, his life would be spared. Section 19. How, though the sphere showed me other mysteries of Spaceland, I still desired more, and what came of it. When I saw my poor brother led away to imprisonment, I attempted to leap down into the council chamber, desiring to intercede on his behalf, or at least bid him farewell. But I found that I had no motion of my own. I absolutely depended on the volition of my guide, who said in gloomy tones, "Heed not thy brother. Haply thou shalt have ample time hereafter to condole with him. Follow me." Reader's note: the following paragraph makes reference to a diagram. Diagram 1 shows a 3-dimensional cube, with visible edges drawn and hidden edges dotted, giving it a 3-dimensional appearance. Horizontal shading makes it appear that the cube is made up of many layers. Diagram 2 shows the same figure, but all lines indicating perspective are missing, with the effect that it no longer appears to be solid, but looks like a 2-dimensional irregular hexagonal figure. End of reader's note. Once more we ascended into space. "Hitherto," said the sphere, "I have shown you naught save plain figures and their interiors. Now I must introduce you to solids, and reveal to you the plan upon which they are constructed. Behold this multitude of movable square cards. See, I put one on another, not, as you supposed, northward of the other, but on the other. Now a second, now a third. See, I am building up a solid by a multitude of squares parallel to one another. Now the solid is complete, being as high as it is long and broad, and we call it a cube." "Pardon me, my lord," replied I, "but to my eye the appearance is as of an irregular figure whose inside is laid open to the view. In other words, methinks I see no solid, but a plane such as we infer in Flatland, only of an irregularity which betokens some monstrous criminal, so that the very sight of it is painful to my eyes." "True. said the sphere, "it appears to you a plane, because you are not accustomed to light and shade and perspective. Just as in Flatland a hexagon would appear a straight line to one who has not the art of sight recognition. But in reality it is a solid, as you shall learn by the sense of feeling." He then introduced me to the cube, and I found that this marvellous being was indeed no plane, but a solid, and that he was endowed with 6 plane sides and 8 terminal points, called solid angles. And I remembered the saying of the sphere, that just such a creature as this would be formed by a square moving, in space, parallel to himself. And I rejoiced to think that so insignificant a creature as I could in some sense be called the progenitor of so illustrious an offspring. But still I could not fully understand the meaning of what my teacher had told me concerning light and shade and perspective, and I did not hesitate to put my difficulties before him. Were I to give the sphere's explanation of these matters, succinct and clear though it was, it would be tedious to an inhabitant of space, who knows these things already. Suffice it that by his lucid statements, and by changing the position of objects and lights, and by allowing me to feel the several objects, and even his own sacred person, he at last made all things clear to me, so that I could now readily distinguish between a circle and a sphere, a plane figure and a solid. This was the climax, the paradise of my strange eventful history. Henceforth I have to relate the story of my miserable fall, most miserable, yet surely most undeserved. For why should the thirst for knowledge be aroused only to be disappointed and punished? My volition shrinks from the painful task of recalling my humiliation. Yet, like a second Prometheus, I will endure this and worse, if by any means I may arouse in the interiors of plain and solid humanity a spirit of rebellion against the conceit which would limit our dimensions to 2 or 3 or any number short of infinity. Away then with all personal considerations. Let me continue to the end, as I began, without further digressions or anticipations, pursuing the plain path of dispassionate history. The exact facts, the exact words, and they are burnt in upon my brain, shall be set down without alteration of an iota, and let my readers judge between me and destiny. The sphere would willingly have continued his lessons by indoctrinating me in the conformation of all regular solids, cylinders, cones, pyramids, pentahedrons, hexahedrons, dodecahedrons, and spheres, but I ventured to interrupt him. Not that I was wearied of knowledge; on the contrary, I thirsted for yet deeper and fuller draughts than he was offering to me. "Pardon me," said I, "O thou whom I must no longer address as the perfection of all beauty, but let me beg thee to vouchsafe thy servant a sight of thine interior." Sphere. My what? I. Thine interior, thy stomach, thy intestines. Sphere. Whence this ill-timed impertinent request? And what mean you by saying that I am no longer the perfection of all beauty? I. My lord, your own wisdom has taught me to aspire to one even more great, more beautiful, and more closely approximate to perfection than yourself. As you yourself, superior to all Flatland forms, combine many circles in one, so doubtless there is one above you who combines many spheres in one supreme existence, surpassing even the solids of Spaceland. And even as we, who are now in space, look down on Flatland and see the insides of all things, so of a certainty there is yet above us some higher, purer region, whither thou dost surely purpose to lead me, O thou whom I shall always call everywhere and in all dimensions my priest, philosopher, and friend, some yet more spacious space, some more dimensionable dimensionality, from the vantage ground of which we shall look down together upon the revealed insides of solid things, and where thine own intestines and those of thy kindred spheres will lie exposed to the view of the poor wandering exile from Flatland, to whom so much has already been vouchsafed. Sphere. Pooh! Stuff! Enough of this trifling. The time is short, and much remains to be done before you are fit to proclaim the gospel of 3 dimensions to your blind, benighted countrymen in Flatland. I. Nay, gracious teacher, deny me not what I know it is in thy power to perform. Grant me but one glimpse of thine interior, and I am satisfied for ever, remaining henceforth thy docile pupil, thy unemancipable slave, ready to receive all thy teachings, and to feed upon the words that fall from thy lips. Sphere. Well then, to content and silence you, let me say at once, I would show you what you wish if I could, but I cannot. Would you have me turn my stomach inside out to oblige you? I. But my lord has shown me the intestines of all my countrymen in the land of 2 dimensions by taking me with him into the land of 3. What therefore more easy than now to take his servant on a second journey into the blessed region of the 4th dimension, where I shall look down with him once more upon this land of 3 dimensions, and see the inside of every 3-dimensioned house, the secrets of the solid earth, the treasures of the mines in Spaceland, and the intestines of every solid living creature, even of the noble and adorable spheres. Sphere. But where is this land of 4 dimensions? I know not, but doubtless my teacher knows. Sphere. Not I. There is no such land. The very idea of it is utterly inconceivable. I. Your lordship tempts his servant to see whether he remembers the revelations imparted to him. Trifle not with me, my lord. I crave, I thirst for more knowledge. Doubtless we cannot see that other higher spaceland now, because we have no eye in our stomachs. But just as there was the realm of Flatland, though that poor puny Lineland monarch could neither turn to left nor right to discern it, and just as there was, close at hand and touching my frame, the land of 3 dimensions, though I, blind, senseless wretch, had no power to touch it, no eye in my interior to discern it, so of a surety there is a 4th dimension, which my lord perceives with the inner eye of thought. And that it must exist, my lord himself has taught me. Or can he have forgotten what he himself imparted to his servant? In 1 dimension, did not a moving point produce a line with 2 terminal points? In 2 dimensions, did not a moving line produce a square with 4 terminal points? In 3 dimensions, did not a moving square produce, did not this eye of mine behold it, that blessed being a cube with 8 terminal points? And in 4 dimensions, shall not a moving cube, alas for analogy, and alas for the progress of truth if it be not so, shall not, I say, the motion of a divine cube result in a still more divine organisation, with 16 terminal points? Behold the infallible confirmation of the series 2, 4, 8, 16. Is not this a geometrical progression? Is not this, if I might quote my lord's own words, strictly according to analogy? Again, was I not taught by my Lord that as in a line there are 2 bounding points, and in a square there are 4 bounding lines, so in a cube there must be 6 bounding squares? Behold once more the confirming series, 2, 4, 6. Is not this an arithmetical progression? And consequently, does it not of necessity follow that the more divine offspring of the divine cube in the land of 4 dimensions must have 8 bounding cubes? And is not this also, as my Lord has taught me to believe, strictly according to analogy? O my Lord, behold! I cast myself in faith upon conjecture, not knowing the facts, and I appeal to your Lordship to confirm or deny my logical anticipations. If I am wrong, I yield, and will no longer demand a 4th dimension, but if I am right, my Lord will listen to reason. I ask, therefore, is it, or is it not, the fact that ere now your countrymen also have witnessed the descent of beings of a higher order than their own, entering closed rooms, even as your Lordship entered mine, without the opening of doors or windows, and appearing and vanishing at will? On the reply to this question I am ready to stake everything. Deny it, and I am henceforth silent. Only vouchsafe an answer. Sphere, after a pause. It is reported so. But men are divided in opinion as to the facts, and even granting the facts, they explain them in different ways, and in any case, however great may be the number of different explanations, no one has adopted or suggested the theory of a 4th dimension. Therefore pray have done with this trifling, and let us return to business. I was certain of it. I was certain that my anticipations would be fulfilled. And now have patience with me, and answer me yet one more question, best of teachers. Those who have thus appeared, no one knows whence, and have returned, no one knows whither, have they also contracted their sections, and vanished somehow into that more spacious space, whither I now entreat you to conduct me? Sphere, moodily. They have vanished, certainly, if they ever appeared. But most people say that these visions arose from the thought. You will not understand me. From the brain, from the perturbed angularity of the seer. I say they so? Oh, believe them not. Or if it indeed be so, that this other space is really thought-land, then take me to that blessed region, where I in thought shall see the insides of all solid things. There, before my ravished eye, a cube, moving in some altogether new direction, but strictly according to analogy, so as to make every particle of his interior pass through a new kind of space with a wake of its own, shall create a still more perfect perfection than himself, with 16 terminal extra solid angles, and 8 solid cubes for his perimeter. And once there, shall we stay our upward course? In that blessed region of 4 dimensions, shall we linger on the threshold of the 5th, and not enter therein? Ah, no! Let us rather resolve that our ambition shall soar with our corporal ascent. Then, yielding to our intellectual onset, the gates of the 6th dimension shall fly open, after that a 7th, and then an 8th. How long I should have continued, I know not. In vain did the sphere in his voice of thunder reiterate his commands of silence, and threaten me with the direst penalties if I persisted. Nothing could stem the flood of my ecstatic aspirations. Perhaps I was to blame, but indeed I was intoxicated with the recent draughts of truth, to which he himself had introduced me. However, the end was not long in coming. My words were cut short by a crash outside, and a simultaneous crash inside me, which impelled me through space with a velocity that precluded speech. Down, down, down. I was rapidly descending, and I knew that return to Flatland was my doom. One glimpse, one last and never to be forgotten glimpse I had of that dull level wilderness, which was now to become my universe again, spread out before my eye. Then a darkness. Then a final, all-consummating thunder peal, and when I came to myself, I was once more a common creeping square, in my study at home, listening to the peace cry of my approaching wife. Section 20. How the sphere encouraged me in a vision. Although I had less than a minute for reflection, I felt, by a kind of instinct, that I must conceal my experiences from my wife. Not that I apprehended at the moment any danger from her divulging my secret, but I knew that to any woman in Flatland the narrative of my adventures must needs be unintelligible. So I endeavoured to reassure her by some story, invented for the occasion, that I had accidentally fallen through the trapdoor of the cellar, and had there lain stunned. The southward attraction in our country is so slight that even to a woman my tale necessarily appeared extraordinary and well nigh incredible. But my wife, whose good sense far exceeds that of the average of her sex, and who perceived that I was unusually excited, did not argue with me on the subject, but insisted that I was ill and required repose. I was glad of an excuse for retiring to my chamber to think quietly over what had happened. When I was at last by myself, a drowsy sensation fell on me; but before my eyes closed I endeavoured to reproduce the third dimension, and especially the process by which a cube is constructed through the motion of a square. It was not so clear as I could have wished, but I remembered that it must be upward and yet not northward, and I determined steadfastly to retain these words as the clue which, if firmly grasped, could not fail to guide me to the solution. So, mechanically repeating like a charm the words "upward yet not northward," I fell into a sound refreshing sleep. During my slumber I had a dream. I thought I was once more by the side of the sphere, whose lustrous hue betokened that he had exchanged his wrath against me for perfect placability. We were moving together towards a bright but infinitesimally small point, to which my master directed my attention. As we approached, methought there issued from it a slight humming noise, as from one of your Spaceland bluebottles, only less resonant by far, so slight indeed that even in the perfect stillness of the vacuum through which we soared, the sound reached not our ears till we checked our flight at a distance from it of something under 20 human diagonals. "Look yonder," said my guide. "In Flatland thou hast lived, of Lineland thou hast received a vision, thou hast soared with me to the heights of Spaceland. Now, in order to complete the range of thy experience, I conduct thee downward to the lowest depths of existence, even to the realm of pointland, the abyss of no dimensions. Behold yon miserable creature. That point is a being like ourselves, but confined to the non-dimensional gulf. He is himself his own world, his own universe. Of any other than himself he can form no conception. He knows not length, nor breadth, nor height, for he has had no experience of them. He has no cognizance even of the number 2, nor has he a thought of plurality, for he is himself his one and all, being really nothing. Yet mark his perfect self-contentment, and hence learn this lesson, that to be self-contented is to be vile and ignorant, and that to aspire is better than to be blindly and impotently happy. Now listen." He ceased, and there arose from the little buzzing creature a tiny, low, monotonous, but distinct tinkling, as from one of your Spaceland phonographs, from which I caught these words: "Infinite beatitude of existence, it is, and there is none else beside it." "What," said I, "does the puny creature mean by it?" "He means himself," said the sphere. "Have you not noticed before now that babies and babyish people who cannot distinguish themselves from the world speak of themselves in the third person? But hush!" "It fills all space," continued the little soliloquizing creature, "and what it fills it is. What it thinks, that it utters, and what it utters, that it hears, and it itself is thinker, utterer, hearer, thought, word, audition. It is the one, and yet the all in all. Ah, the happiness, ah, the happiness of being!" "Can you not startle the little thing out of its complacency?" said I. "Tell it what it really is, as you told me. Reveal to it the narrow limitations of Pointland, and lead it up to something higher." "That is no easy task," said my master. "Try you." Hereon, raising my voice to the uttermost, I addressed the point as follows: "Silence! Silence, contemptible creature! You call yourself the all in all, but you are the nothing. Your so-called universe is a mere speck in a line, and a line is a mere shadow as compared with—" "Hush, hush, you have said enough," interrupted the sphere. "Now listen, and mark the effect of your harangue on the King of Pointland." The lustre of the monarch, who beamed more brightly than ever upon hearing my words, showed clearly that he retained his complacency, and I had hardly ceased when he took up his strain again. Ah, the joy of thought! What can it not achieve by thinking? Its own thought coming to itself, suggestive of its disparagement, thereby to enhance its happiness. Sweet rebellion stirred up to result in triumph. Ah, the divine creative power of the all-in-one! Ah, the joy of being!" "You see," said my teacher, "how little your words have done? So far as the monarch understands them at all, he accepts them as his own, for he cannot conceive of any other except himself, and plumes himself upon the variety of its thought as an instance of creative power. Let us leave this god of Pointland to the ignorant fruition of his omnipresence and omniscience. Nothing that you or I can do can rescue him from his self-satisfaction." After this, as we floated gently back to Flatland, I could hear the mild voice of my companion pointing the moral of my vision, and stimulating me to aspire, and to teach others to aspire. He had been angered at first, he confessed, by my ambition to soar to dimensions above the third, but since then he had received fresh insight, and he was not too proud to acknowledge his error to a pupil. Then he proceeded to initiate me into mysteries yet higher than those I had witnessed, showing me how to construct extra solids by the motion of solids, and double extra solids by the motion of extra solids, and all strictly according to analogy, all by methods so simple, so easy, as to be patent even to the female sex. End of section 20. Recording by Ruth Golding. Two, sections 21 and 22 of Flatland. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Ruth Golding. Flatland, a Romance of Many Dimensions by Edwin Abbott Abbott. Section 21. How I tried to teach the theory of three dimensions to my grandson, and with what success. I awoke rejoicing, and began to reflect on the glorious career before me. I would go forth, methought, at once, and evangelise the whole of Flatland. Even to women and soldiers should the gospel of three dimensions be proclaimed. I would begin with my wife. Just as I had decided on the plan of my operations, I heard the sound of many voices in the street, commanding silence. Then followed a louder voice. It was a herald's proclamation. Listening attentively, I recognised the words of the resolution of the council, enjoining the arrest, imprisonment, or execution of anyone who should pervert the minds of the people by delusions, and by professing to have received revelations from another world. I reflected. This danger was not to be trifled with. It would be better to avoid it by omitting all mention of my revelation, and by proceeding on the path of demonstration, which, after all, seemed so simple and so conclusive that nothing would be lost by discarding the former means. Upward, not northward, was the clue to the whole proof. It had seemed to me fairly clear before I fell asleep, and when I first awoke, fresh from my dream, it had appeared as patent as arithmetic. But somehow it did not seem to me quite so obvious now. Though my wife entered the room opportunely just at that moment, I decided, after we had interchanged a few words of commonplace conversation, not to begin with her. My pentagonal sons were men of character and standing, and physicians of no mean reputation, but not great in mathematics, and in that respect unfit for my purpose. But it occurred to me that a young and docile hexagon with a mathematical turn would be a most suitable pupil. Why, therefore, not make my first experiment with my little precocious grandson, whose casual remarks on the meaning of 3 cubed had met with the approval of the sphere? Discussing the matter with him, a mere boy, I should be in perfect safety, for he would know nothing of the proclamation of the council, whereas I could not feel sure that my sons, so greatly did their patriotism and reverence for the circles predominate over mere blind affection, might not feel compelled to hand me over to the prefect, if they found me seriously maintaining the seditious heresy of the third dimension. But the first thing to be done was to satisfy in some way the curiosity of my wife, who naturally wished to know something of the reasons for which the circle had desired that mysterious interview, and of the means by which he had entered our house. Without entering into the details of the elaborate account I gave her, an account, I fear, not quite so consistent with truth as my readers in Spaceland might desire, I must be content with saying that I succeeded at last in persuading her to return quietly to her household duties, without eliciting from me any reference to the world of 3 dimensions. This done, I immediately sent for my grandson, for, to confess the truth, I felt that all I had seen and heard was in some strange way slipping away from me, like the image of a half-grasped, tantalizing dream, and I longed to essay my skill in making a first disciple. When my grandson entered the room, I carefully secured the door. Then, sitting down by his side, and taking our mathematical tablets, or, as you would call them, lines, I told him we would resume the lesson of yesterday. I taught him once more how a point by motion in one dimension produces a line, and how a straight line in 2 dimensions produces a square. After this, forcing a laugh, I said, "And now, you scamp, you wanted to make me believe that a square may in the same way by motion upward, not northward, produce another figure, a sort of extra square in 3 dimensions. Say that again, you young rascal." At this moment we heard once more the herald's "Oh yes, oh yes," outside in the street, proclaiming the resolution of the council. Young though he was, my grandson, who was unusually intelligent for his age, and bred up in perfect reverence for the authority of the circles, took in the situation with an acuteness for which I was quite unprepared. He remained silent till the last words of the proclamation had died away, and then, bursting into tears, "Dear grandpapa," he said, "that was only my fun, and of course I meant nothing at all by it, and we did not know anything then about the new law, and I don't think I said anything about the 3rd dimension, and I am sure I did not say one word about upward, not northward, for that would be such nonsense, you know. How could a thing move upward and not northward? Upward and not northward! Even if I were a baby, I could not be so absurd as that. How silly it is! Ha, ha, ha!" "Not at all silly," said I, losing my temper. "Here, for example, I take this square," and at the word I grasped a movable square which was lying at hand, "and I move it, you see, not northward, but, yes, I move it upward. That is to say, not northward, but I move it somewhere, not exactly like this, but somehow—" Here I brought my sentence to an inane conclusion, shaking the square about in a purposeless manner, much to the amusement of my grandson, who burst out laughing louder than ever, and declared that I was not teaching him, but joking with him; and so saying, he unlocked the door and ran out of the room. Thus ended my first attempt to convert a pupil to the gospel of 3 dimensions. Section 22. How I then tried to diffuse the theory of 3 dimensions by other means, and of the result. My failure with my grandson did not encourage me to communicate my secret to others of my household. Yet neither was I led by it to despair of success. Only I saw that I must not wholly rely on the catch-phrase "upward, not northward," but must rather endeavour to seek a demonstration by setting before the public a clear view of the whole subject, and for this purpose it seemed necessary to resort to writing. So I devoted several months in privacy to the composition of a treatise on the mysteries of 3 dimensions. Only, with the view of evading the law, if possible, I spoke not of a physical dimension, but of a thoughtland, whence, in theory, a figure could look down upon Flatland, and see simultaneously the insides of all things, and where it was possible that there might be supposed to exist a figure environed, as it were, with 6 squares, and containing 8 terminal points. But in writing this book, I found myself sadly hampered by the impossibility of drawing such diagrams as were necessary for my purpose. For of course in our country of Flatland there are no tablets but lines, and no diagrams but lines, all in one straight line, and only distinguishable by difference of size and brightness. so that when I had finished my treatise, which I entitled Through Flatland to Thoughtland, I could not feel certain that many would understand my meaning. Meanwhile my life was under a cloud. All pleasures palled upon me. All sights tantalized and tempted me to outspoken treason, because I could not but compare what I saw in 2 dimensions with what it really was if seen in 3, and could hardly refrain from making my comparisons aloud. I neglected my clients and my own business to give myself to the contemplation of the mysteries which I had once beheld, yet which I could impart to no one, and found daily more difficult to reproduce, even before my own mental vision. One day, about 11 months after my return from Spaceland, I tried to see a cube with my eye closed, but failed. And though I succeeded afterwards, I was not then quite certain, nor have I been ever afterwards, that I had exactly realized the original. This made me more melancholy than before, and determined me to take some step, yet what I knew not. I felt that I would have been willing to sacrifice my life for the cause, if thereby I could have produced conviction. But if I could not convince my grandson, how could I convince the highest and most developed circles in the land? And yet at times my spirit was too strong for me, and I gave vent to dangerous utterances. Already I was considered heterodox, if not treasonable, and I was keenly alive to the dangers of my position. Nevertheless, I could not at times refrain from bursting out into suspicious or half seditious utterances, even among the highest polygonal and circular society. When, for example, the question arose about the treatment of those lunatics who said that they had received the power of seeing the insides of things, I would quote the saying of an ancient circle, who declared that prophets and inspired people are always considered by the majority to be mad; and I could not help occasionally dropping such expressions as the eye that discerns the interiors of things, and the all-seeing land. Once or twice I even let fall the forbidden terms, the 3rd and 4th dimensions. At last, to complete a series of minor indiscretions, at a meeting of our local speculative society, held at the palace of the prefect himself, some extremely silly person having read an elaborate paper exhibiting the precise reasons why Providence has limited the number of dimensions to 2, and why the attribute of omnividence is assigned to the Supreme alone, I so far forgot myself as to give an exact account of the whole of my voyage with the sphere into space, and to the assembly hall in our metropolis, and then to space again, and of my return home, and of everything that I had seen and heard in fact or vision. At first, indeed, I pretended that I was describing the imaginary experiences of a fictitious person, but my enthusiasm soon forced me to throw off all disguise, and finally, in a fervent peroration, I exhorted all my hearers to divest themselves of prejudice, and to become believers in the 3rd dimension. Need I say that I was at once arrested and taken before the council? Next morning, standing in the very place where but a very few months ago the sphere had stood in my company, I was allowed to begin and to continue my narration unquestioned and uninterrupted. But from the first I foresaw my fate. For the President, noting that a guard of the better sort of policemen was in attendance, of angularity little, if at all, under 55 degrees, ordered them to be relieved, before I began my defence, by an inferior class of 2 or 3 degrees. I knew only too well what that meant. I was to be executed or imprisoned, and my story was to be kept secret from the world by the simultaneous destruction of the officials who had heard it. And this being the case, The President desired to substitute the cheaper for the more expensive victims. After I had concluded my defence, the President, perhaps perceiving that some of the junior circles had been moved by my evident earnestness, asked me 2 questions. 1. Whether I could indicate the direction which I meant when I used the words upward, not northward. 2. Whether I could, by any diagrams or descriptions, other than the enumeration of imaginary sides and angles, indicate the figure I was pleased to call a cube. I declared that I could say nothing more, and that I must commit myself to the truth, whose cause would surely prevail in the end. The President replied that he quite concurred in my sentiment, and that I could not do better. I must be sentenced to perpetual imprisonment. But if the truth intended that I should emerge from prison and evangelise the world, the truth might be trusted to bring that result to pass. Meanwhile I should be subjected to no discomfort that was not necessary to preclude escape, and unless I forfeited the privilege by misconduct, I should be occasionally permitted to see my brother, who had preceded me to my prison. 7 years have elapsed, and I am still a prisoner, and, if I except the occasional visits of my brother, debarred from all companionship save that of my gaolers. My brother is one of the best of squares, just, sensible, cheerful, and not without fraternal affection. Yet I must confess that my weekly interviews, at least in one respect, cause me the bitterest pain. He was present when the sphere manifested himself in the council chamber. He saw the sphere's changing sections. He heard the explanation of the phenomena then given to the circles. Since that time, scarcely a week has passed during 7 whole years without his hearing from me a repetition of the part I played in that manifestation, together with ample descriptions of all the phenomena in Spaceland, and the arguments for the existence of solid things, derivable from analogy. Yet, I take shame to be forced to confess it, my brother has not yet grasped the nature of the 3rd dimension, and frankly avows his disbelief in the existence of a sphere. Hence I am absolutely destitute of converts, and, for aught that I can see, the millennial revelation has been made to me for nothing. Prometheus up in Spaceland was bound for bringing down fire for mortals, but I, poor Flatland Prometheus, lie here in prison for bringing down nothing to my countrymen. Yet I exist in the hope that these memoirs in some manner, I know not how, may find their way to the minds of humanity in some dimension, and may stir up a race of rebels who shall refuse to be confined to limited dimensionality. That is the hope of my brighter moments. Alas, it is not always so. Heavily weighs on me at times the burdensome reflection that I cannot honestly say I am confident as to the exact shape of the once seen, oft regretted cube. And in my nightly visions the mysterious precept, upward, not northward, haunts me like a soul-devouring sphinx. It is part of the martyrdom which I endure for the cause of the truth that there are seasons of mental weakness, when cubes and spheres flit away into the background of scarce possible existences, when the land of 3 dimensions seems almost as visionary as the land of 1 or none. Nay, when even this hard wall that bars me from my freedom, these very tablets on which I am writing, and all the substantial realities of Flatland itself, appear no better than the offspring of a diseased imagination, or the baseless fabric of a dream. The End of Flatland A Romance of Many Dimensions, by Edwin Abbott Abbott. Read by Ruth Golding, October 2008.